A British TV documentary says war crimes were committed against the Tamil fighters in Sri Lanka's long civil war. The government's now under pressure to investigate. But how would it refute the accusations? And would that hamper reconciliation efforts in Sri Lanka? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finnegan. It was a civil war that ravaged Sri Lanka for almost 30 years. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed, many of them civilians. And now damning evidence in a documentary aired in Britain alleges the Sri Lankan government did in fact commit war crimes. But with neither side being held accountable, are hopes for reconciliation in Sri Lanka fading. Kamal Santamaria reports.
It was a 26-year military conflict. It left an estimated 100,000 people killed. But almost 3 years after the end of the civil war, Sri Lanka is still haunted by the allegations of human rights violations. Footage aired in a television documentary in the UK on Wednesday appears to show the execution of 5 men and a 12-year-old boy, the son of a Tamil tiger, images only adding to the controversy. The Sri Lankan Defence Ministry responded angrily, laying the blame squarely on the Tamil tigers. They said the Ministry of Defence rejects all allegations of human rights violation, stating that it is able to prove with valid evidence that it was the LTTE that committed gross violation of human rights over the past 3 decades. And it is these opposing narratives of the last days of the conflict that lie at the crux of diplomatic tensions. The final battle between the Sri Lankan military and Tamil Tiger rebels in May 2009 left thousands of civilians dead, many more trapped and under constant artillery fire. Both sides were accused of violations. The government of shelling civilians in no-fire zones it set up for Tamil civilians, and the rebels of using civilians as human shields and killing those trying to escape. The Sri Lankan government denies all allegations of war crimes. In recent months, Washington urged them to reveal the truth of what actually happened during the final days of the war with the Tamil Tigers.
We do believe there should be an investigation into war crimes. A very important part of this whole process of reconciliation will be accountability and investigating what happened throughout the course of the war, but particularly at the end of the war.
This comes as the UN Human Rights Council is due to discuss next week a resolution urging a probe into alleged war crimes in Sri Lanka. But as the government continues to resist any outside involvement, hopes of reconciliation in Sri Lanka itself still appear a long way away. Kamal Santamaria for Inside Story.
So, will Sri Lanka admit to the alleged war crimes featured in the British television documentary? To discuss the issue, we're joined by our guests today from Geneva, Rajiva Wijesinha, Sri Lankan MP and advisor to the President on reconciliation. Rajiva Wijesinha was also former head of the Sri Lankan Peace Secretariat and Secretariat to the Ministry of Human Rights for the Sri Lankan government. From London, we're joined by Phil Rees, the author of Dining with Terrorists, Meeting with the World's Most Wanted Militants, in which he was embedded with the Tamil Tigers. Phil's been covering Sri Lanka for 25 years. And also in London, Kumar Kumarendran, a member of the British Tamils Forum. Kumar is also a member of the Tamils diaspora now residing in the UK. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. Mr. Wijesinha, we'll start with you in Geneva. First of all, how do you respond to the accusations featured in the British television documentary that the Sri Lankan government is guilty of war crimes?
Well, if you examine the documentary, which I did last night, it makes 4 main points, and most of these are things it said before, with a great deal of fraudulence, I'm afraid. The very first allegation it makes refers to what it claims was the shelling of a UN hub. In actual fact, it claims that this evidence was provided by a chap called Peter McKay, who was a UN operative. In fact, I'd got all the details from the UN before, and Peter McKay did not figure in the list of people who went with this convoy. It's also described in a book by a chap called Gordon Weiss. He was not one of those who came out. So in the first place, he's a very mysterious figure. And after this program yesterday, I've actually asked our Foreign Office, which I did before sometime earlier, and I'm afraid they didn't follow up, to check on this. Part of the problem is I think we trust the UN a lot, and I think that's justified as far as the senior UN people go. But the younger people tend to make up stories sometimes, perhaps out of idealism, perhaps out of some other motive. So that first thing, I think, is totally discredited by the way in which it's presented. But I think we also need to look at some of the lies in it. For instance, he claims that on 23rd January, various things happened. I actually have with me some of the correspondence from the head of UN security that was issued during those days. And there are very, very interesting phrases from the head of security thanking us for the cooperation. So why does this chap tell lies? I'd be happy if you gave me time to talk about the other 3 incidents as well. But it starts with a lie, which is not a good thing.
All right. Unfortunately, we've got a little under 20 minutes in which to... I'm sorry, we've got a little under 20 minutes to discuss all of this, and most of which was covered at length in the documentary. So
you won't let me quote from the UN letter? Well, if you can't let me quote, give me another chance later.
Many of our audience, many of our viewers won't have been able to see the documentary that was aired on British television because, of course, Al Jazeera is a global network. Let's bring in Phil Rees. Phil, what's your response to what you've just heard?
Well, if these claims are true, why doesn't the Sri Lankan government allow journalists and indeed any independent observers, including the United Nations, in there to determine the truth of them? I mean, yes, I think that a pinch of cynicism about information that comes out from the Tamil diaspora is healthy for any journalist, should be skeptical about it. But I travelled in Sri Lanka last in 2008 when the war was at its most severe and the country was in lockdown, and the Tamil population, Sinhalese who were involved in NGOs, any of that group were living in fear. There's a great deal of terror going around, the culture of the white van, the culture of disappearances. When I met Tamils who'd been put into camps in the north, apparently for their own protection, according to the government, they were barely able to speak on occasion because they were so scared. So, I mean, I don't know the precise validity of some of the allegations made, but in my view, they ring true.
Kumar Kumarendran, evidence suggests that human rights abuses were committed by both sides in the final stages of the war, that civilians were used as human shields and prevented from escaping government shelling, sometimes shot as they tried to get away. Do you accept that Tamils were also involved in atrocities?
Well, the UN panel of experts appointed by the Secretary General said that both sides have to be investigated for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Last night we saw most appalling, crimes. The Sri Lankan government is accused of shelling more than 40,000 innocent civilians in a no-fire zone, and all the sexual abuses that had taken place. They were showing naked bodies of women, journalists. I agree with Phil. Journalists should be allowed to go into Sri Lanka, but it's very dangerous for journalists to be in Sri Lanka. It was made, the point was made that 26 journalists were killed, and many journalists have left the country for fear of their lives. So what we are saying is that there has to be an international, independent investigation into war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan government denies it. They are trying to discredit Channel 4. I think the Channel 4 has done a good job in investigative journalism. I think credit should be given to them. And if there is no point in just denying it, what we should really do is to investigate what really went on there. That's why, if the Sri Lankan government has got nothing to hide, let the UN, an international independent body, to go in there and find out what really took place there.
All right. Now, Mr. Wijesinha, as you pointed out, the Sri Lankan government has always vigorously defended its conduct in the final stages of the war. It says that its soldiers acted in accordance with international law. As we've just heard there, if it has nothing to hide, why does it continue to rebuff outside pressure? Why is it so opposed to an independent investigation?
I'm sorry, I think you're talking absolute rubbish. We have to rebut charges that are false. We do have inquiries that are going on internally. I don't see why you think external inquiries are independent. Let me just give you an example. Yesterday on the Channel 4 film, it was shown just after a rather splendid spoof account by Channel 4 itself of a video recently released about the Lord's Own Army. And there was a wonderful suggestion by the characters involved that this was just media hype. In fact, the Ugandans have said a lot of the footage was taken from 5 years ago. It was just a complete attempt to push a particular line. The line may have been a valid one in terms of the work of the Lord's Own Army or whatever it's called, but Channel 4 itself was suggesting that there was something deeply fraudulent about this. And then it immediately showed something very fraudulent. And one of the reasons I say this is that when Channel 4 initially showed part of a documentary purporting to be people being executed, it said very clearly it was provided to Channel 4 by something called Journalists for Democracy. It said that the incident had taken place in January, and the result is that the American State Department, which produced what I thought was not a bad report asking us to explain certain things, actually said this thing about January. Later it was found out that this video had been doctored. Channel 4 refused to give us the video. They refused to give the UN the video. And the UN says they finally got a copy from Channel 4, which was different in salient points from the video that had been initially shown. Now, what was actually very funny is yesterday, having shown this whole farrago, and the second video was actually, according to UN experts, edited backward. It was really very strange because the dead bodies kept vanishing. There were 18, then 14. And finally, the UN said, well, it was taken in different segments. Section 1 was shown at point 3. Section 3 was shown at point 1. Section 5 was taken at a different time and possibly even a different place. And they never explained this. Now, it's perfectly conceivable this was a genuine video, but then why edit it backwards? And the really funny thing was who corroborates this story? Someone from Journalists for Democracy.
Okay.
So, you know, you talk about independence. You have to realize that every media outlet, every journalist has a certain dependence upon others. You have to find out where funding comes from, and unfortunately, the Tiger diaspora is extremely rich. We don't know anything about the background to some of this stuff. And take what Phil Rees said. He made this outrageous allegation about sexual abuse. You looked at what Channel 4 showed yesterday. They showed you a couple of dead bodies taken and said that is sexual abuse. I mean, you need evidence before you can make allegations like that.
Okay.
Then take something else Channel 4 did.
All right, hang on.
I'm sorry, this is very important. And I think it's vital that I should get twice as much time to rebut with facts,
I understand.
with evidence,
all right,
with
Phil,
the papers
I just want to get a
me.
response from Phil Rees. Phil?
You know, the point is that this goes to basically the view of the Rajapaksa government in 2005, 2006. They felt they could eliminate the Tamil Tigers. Now, of course, the Tamil Tigers were a very brutal organization, absolutely no denying that. But they had a policy not of reconciling the Tamil population there, but of basically gaining political success by developing a kind of populist Sinhala view. Remember the president, he's from the south, from Hambantota, an area of poor peasants there. He's created a culture of Sinhala nationalism, which has propelled him into political success, and it's also driven their military policies in this war. So talk about reconciliation, in my view, is pretty vacuous. And therefore, when it came to actually executing the war, it was an attempt to basically recolonize, to basically occupy this area again that they felt Tamils have for years been trying to divide Sri Lanka and take away from them. So I think that the real passions behind this are because of the ideologies that are there in the background, both the political realities and the military ones.
Kumar Kumarendran in London. The Sri Lankan government accuses the international community of giving credence to charges that are fabricated by the Tamil Tigers' overseas propaganda network. Are you part of a propaganda network?
If they are saying it's propaganda, why not we investigate? Send an international independent body into Sri Lanka and we'll find out what really went on. Now, allowing Sri Lanka to investigate itself doesn't make sense. You know, anyone with the right mind would agree that if someone's mother was killed by shelling by the Sri Lankan government, and if the person's sister was raped by Sri Lankan soldiers, that person is not going to accept the murderer and the rapist to investigate themselves. I mean, it doesn't make sense. So that's why we are calling for an international independent investigation, because we are not talking of petty crimes here. These are very serious allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The Sri Lankan government underestimated, purposefully. They said only 60,000 people are there in the no spy zone, whereas according to that the program we saw, there were hundreds of thousands of people in there. So they did not send supplies, medical supplies, food supplies, and we saw people, dying of hunger and lack of medical facilities. So these are, crimes against humanity. The president of Sri Lanka said that it was a humanitarian operation, and he said his soldiers went to war with a gun on one hand and the humanitarian book on the other, and also he denied any sort of civilian casualty.
Okay.
But later, he accepted that thousands of people died. So can you trust the Sri Lankan government? If you take the LLRC commission, it doesn't deal with accountability. Without accountability, how can we have reconciliation? People don't know whether their loved ones are still living or they are in custody. The LLRC came up with an interim recommendation in September 2010, and the LLRC, after 14 months, said the credibility of the Sri Lankan government is questionable, because even their recommendations, two recommendations to disarm the paramilitaries and publish the list of detainees,
all right,
the Sri Lankan government has not done it.
Okay. All right.
So how can you trust?
All right. You're talking the LLRC. You're talking about the lessons learned and reconciliation commission.
Yeah, it was a commission that was set up by the Sri Lankan government.
Rajiva Wijesinha, the LLRC has been highly critical of, as we heard, of some government policies. It is, though, a state-commissioned body. Why does the government not accept, I come back to the question I put to you before, that the way to a truly sustainable peace is through an independent investigation of alleged atrocities committed by both sides?
Let me just say, a little learning is a very dangerous thing. If I might go back to what Patrick Rees said, his characterization of the Sri Lankan situation is just so simplistic. He tries to put it as Sinhalese versus Tamils. Do you know that the Tamil Tigers decimated more Tamils during its reign of terror? Several moderate politicians were terrorized, killed, beginning with the former leader of the opposition, Mr. Amirthalingam, Mr. Sam Thambimuthu, a peace activist from the east. Our foreign minister, Lakshman Kadirgama, was killed. Neelan Tiruchal, a distinguished Harvard lawyer, was killed. And during the war period, or rather during the ceasefire, they actually took the chance to kill lots of Tamil-speaking officers. The Tamil policemen were killed. So you have to realize that this was not a Tamil group. Unfortunately, the diaspora, as one British MP told me, they're a bit like champagne socialists. I'm sorry, you told me I could rebut certain things that were said. And let me just finish this rebuttal, if I may.
Make it brief,
so
please.
That Mr. Rees, what qualifications does he have? But if you want the LLRC report, it's very clear. I mean, when we appointed the LLRC, everyone said, it'll be a whitewash, you can't trust them. When it delivers a really good report, and you have to read what a lot of the Sri Lankan people said about it. The leader of the House tabled the report in Parliament. Many countries welcomed it. Unfortunately, this strange combination of a few, what I might call diaspora-influenced Tamils, plus the American State Department actually attacked this report and sort of said it wasn't enough, it didn't go into accountability. And how dare the second gentleman say that a country can't investigate its own? Do you hear people like Patrick Rees and this guy saying that the American investigation of that man who killed 16 Afghans should not be left to America? I just saw on Al Jazeera he was taken off to Kuwait. Yeah. You know what happened to the chaps who cut off the fingers of Afghans? Okay. You know what happened in Abu Ghraib? Right. And here are people appealing to the West to say that only the West can judge properly, when we know perfectly well that Islamic people have been terrorized and who gives them justice.
All right, you've had your say. Mr. Wijesinha, many thanks. Phil Rees, I know you want to respond.
Well, yes. I mean, you talk about being terrorized. I mean, the Sinhalese population who actually dissent from government policy is being terrorized. Journalists who are Sinhalese are being terrorists. The defense minister, the prime minister, the president's brother has been linked to the death of one of them. I mean, to try to say that this environment is one that can have a fair and balanced analysis of possibly war crimes that involve the deaths of up to 40,000 civilians, I think is something that the outside world will never accept. And if you think about it, a lot of people are talking about what's going on in Syria now. What, 8,000, the UN say, possibly civilian deaths there? The numbers in northern Sri Lanka were much higher than that. So, yes, should the outside world just say, no, fine, we'll let this group of people, this government, analyze and they'll come out with their own report? You know, I think that's completely foolhardy. I think that, of course, there needs to be some kind of assessment of what's going on.
Kumar Kumarendran, do you suspect that there remains a deeply embedded discrimination against the Tamils within government in Sri Lanka?
Yes, that has always been there since independence in 1948. There has not been any change. Now people are living under the military in the north, and they don't have any freedom. Now, if I can come back to that the soldier who killed the Afghan people, he did not receive orders from President Obama, whereas in Sri Lanka, where the hospitals were bombed even after the coordinates were given to the Sri Lankan government, and the lack of supplies, medical supplies, and the food, and the shelling of more than 40,000 innocent civilians, the order came from right at the top. Now, that's what is being alleged. So that's why we need an international independent investigation. Now, if you take, now the international community must do more now. You know, now that all this the evidence is there, if you take the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, Jayalalitha Rajaram, as soon as she came to power, she said what happened in Sri Lanka was genocide. And she called President Rajapaksa a war criminal, and she passed a resolution. And now the former Chief Minister is, he has said that he will not support the Indian government. Now the Foreign Minister of India yesterday said that Sri Lanka is a neighboring country, we have to be sensitive. Now if you go home and find out that your neighbor is a serial killer, all right, and the police has not caught up with him, what will you do?
All right, Mr. Wijesinha.
So I think India as a regional power must, I think, must reconsider its position.
Okay, Mr. Wijesinha, we've literally a matter of minutes left.
Okay, a couple of minutes. I mean, this is outrageous. He's alleging that President Rajapaksa did it. Has anyone objected to the fact that the killing of Osama bin Laden and the children, justified by Lee Wiesel, who said it was the children's fault for being with Osama bin Laden, that was a command performance for President Obama? Now, there may have been good reasons for the Americans to want vengeance against Osama bin Laden, but surely that is a clear case of a command, direct. No one challenges that. Instead, we have these vague allegations that President Rajapaksa ordered certain things. I've been to those hospitals. I've seen, I have the ICRC documents. There were only 4 shells in those 4 hospitals between January and March that actually fell near or in the hospital. And let me just remind you, we have a Tamil ambassador in Geneva, and she has been receiving death threats, because what these people are trying to do is to polarize and say that there are no Tamils in high office. We have had Tamil chief justices, Tamil army commanders, Tamil inspectors general of police, Tamil attorney generals, Tamil chief justices, but the diaspora, as the British MP told me, think are sort of champagne socialists. And this can't go on if we're going to be reconciled. I think you should not privilege such appalling lies.
All right, Phil Rees, we'll give the last word to you. Do you want to respond? And let's just broaden this out right at the end here. What further pressure can the UN Human Rights Council apply to Sri Lanka? Would it make a blind bit of difference?
Well, I don't think it would really. I mean, for years, Sri Lanka grafted, the government grafted its war on the war on terror onto its own internal conflict. And I'm afraid to say there's no genuine attempt at reconciliation. And I say, looking forward, that's the big problem. That, you know, the form of nationalism that's there now is to say to the Tamils, you almost need to be part of a Sinhala state. And I think there has to be some kind of change in that for there to be any long-standing peace and to certainly overcome the terrible events of the war.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid we are out of time. Many thanks indeed for being with us today. Rajiva Wijesinha in Geneva, Phil Rees in London, and Kumar Kumarendran in London. And thank you very much indeed for being with us on this edition of Inside Story. Send us some feedback if you'd like to comment on anything that you've heard today. Email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finnegan. I'll see you again. Bye for now.